on the screen. Don will be doing a little PowerPoint in a little bit, and Mike will be talking, going kind of back and forth. This is our first remote program called Saving Our Own, and this is a program that Don and Mike put together, and I'll let them talk about that in a little bit, but we'll just stand by for a little bit and we'll kick off here. We still have more people joining, so. I will be adding members. We've got a great representation from all over Pennsylvania. If you guys will have questions for us, please type them in the Q&A section of Zoom. And I will call on your name and you will be able to ask the question. This is different than a regular Zoom meeting. This is the Zoom webinar module. So it's got a few different features. So we're able to hear you. We're able to see some of you guys that are on, and I see some people that I know that are on. I'm going to continue to monitor the webinar as we go on. So, as you know, there's a Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom webinar module. So if you would have a question, you could type it in there, or you could raise your hand. Obviously, you raise your hand, and I will be monitoring. I'll be monitoring the webinar to see when that happens. Both Don and Mike don't mind if we would, stop and have to ask a question as they move on. But we definitely feel this is an important topic, and Mike's expertise in working with workers' comp and the cancer presumption laws in Pennsylvania. Mike not only assists career firefighters, but volunteer firefighters, and Don's many years as a firefighter, fire chief, and as the executive director of PFESI has worked many different situations in regards to helping firefighters in Pennsylvania. Everyone, my name is Jerry Ozog. I'm the executive director of the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute in Harrisburg. Obviously, we're on Facebook, PFESI. We have a website, pfesi.org, and try to get on Twitter occasionally also. And it's our mission to perform education and advocacy for the fire service in Pennsylvania. We primarily work with members of the General Assembly in the House and Senate and their staff members. And last year, we were very successful in working to get a number of legislative initiatives established, Act 91 being the big one. And that was the omnibus bill that reauthorized the Fire Commissioners Grant Program. It did a little bit of reorganization with the Pennsylvania Fire Commissioner's Office in transferring the relief administration to the Fire Commissioner's Office, and also modifying relief a little bit where recruitment and retention funds can be now used, relief funds could be used for volunteer recruitment and retention along with the State Fire Commissioner's grants. So there's a lot of legislative successes that we've had, but I do want to tell you, and Don would probably say the same thing with his talks. and years of experience at PFESI, because he was one of the founders of PFESI in 1991, is, Harrisburg is not going to fix the complete fire service in Pennsylvania. It's going to be working with all levels of government to improve and enhance the Pennsylvania fire service. And one of the things that we continue to hear are issues in regards to workers' compensation for firefighters. And this specific seminar is designed for the cancer presumption law and some of the things that are very important in regards to the cancer presumption law. Mike Dryden is the best way I could explain Mike Dryden. He's one of the good Philadelphia lawyers. Okay. Everybody always hears of the bad Philadelphia lawyers in Pennsylvania, but he's one that is all about assisting the fire service and helping the fire service. And he will get a chance to talk through his part of the seminar tonight. And I'm sure if you have any specific personal questions to ask him, because when somebody usually calls me from Pennsylvania and has an issue with cancer, I'll send them Mike's email and they'll talk. Other person on our website or on a webinar tonight is someone that's very well known in Pennsylvania, and that's retired Chief Don Kunkel from the city of Harrisburg, Bureau of Fire, and the former executive director of the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute. He was one of the founding members of the board back in 1991. Don's got a long history of helping, and now Don is currently on the legislative committee for the Firemen's Association of the state of Pennsylvania. And I encourage all of you who registered, I do have all of your emails, and I'll send a follow-up on some of the things that we've done over the years. But with that introduction, I'm going to kick it off to either Don and Mike. They're going to start talking. I'm going to monitor the chat and keep letting people in. But they're going to be going back and forth and just treating this very similar to a classroom environment. So with that, I'll turn it over to Don and Mike.
Okay, just real quickly before we start the PowerPoint. As Jerry said, you're welcome to interrupt at any time. This is sort of free flow, and we hope you get some benefit out of what we're doing here. And let me get the PowerPoint up. Okay. And Jerry, I can't increase the size. Is that one visible?
I don't see it yet, Don. It has to be highlighted.
Okay.
Yeah, just click on share screen.
Is it there now?
Hold on one second. Can you see a PowerPoint, Mike?
I see. It looks like you got to click on something that says simplifying your communications with Zoom phone. There's a mouse moving around it, but it did come up with a green border that looks like it's the front of Don's screen.
Right now I got the whole screen. I got the whole PowerPoint up on my screen.
Okay, we're not seeing that.
Hold on one second. Hold on. Go ahead and try it again, Don.
Okay.
So I got a backup. I'm ready to go. Hold on here.
You got what backup?
I got the. I'll run it from here.
Okay.
You just tell me when to go. Hold on here.
Okay.
Give me 1 second.
There it is.
There we go.
Okay, everybody seeing it?
I think we
We're
are
good.
good.
I see it.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. As Jerry has said, guys, I'm Don Kunkel. There's my contact information, home phone number, and my email. And with me tonight, and Jerry sort of stole my line, I tell people I didn't think I'd end my career traveling the state of Pennsylvania with a Philadelphia attorney. And I can't see your reactions, but generally, the further I am from Philly, the funnier that line gets. By the time I get to Pittsburgh, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I am honored to be with Mike, and for several reasons. Not only is Mike a really great attorney, and he knows more about the cancer presumption law, arguably, than anybody else in the state of Pennsylvania. And that's important because the insurance companies are going to bring 3 or 4 people, 1 or 3 or 4 people who do mostly cancer presumption cases. And if you bring an attorney who is your brother-in-law that does real estate law to a cancer presumption case, you're going to get killed. So Mike's expertise in this whole thing is critical. But beyond that, Mike's got a strong background in labor law. He believes in workers' rights. His dad was a Teamster union official in Philly, so that sort of gives you the atmosphere he grew up in. And Mike is just a great person to have in your corner. And if you have questions, he's the guy you need to talk to. Don't let somebody tell you the type of cancer you have isn't eligible or anything else. Mike will vet your case and give you an honest assessment of where you are as we go forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Don. Well, I always strive to live up to what Don's introduction has been of me in the 70 times that we've done this. The Philadelphia lawyer thing, though, is something that we have seen. We can't really rate it here, but in Pittsburgh, I think they laughed for 30 seconds in Pittsburgh when he dropped that one on me out there. But for me, this is a very important thing that we do. The thing that the Institute and Don created, this program. I think we're going to take care of the law. We're going to be able to explain to you how you make a claim. But a big part of this, and part of what I think is my responsibility in representing as many members of the fire service as I do, is to sort of help with the avoidance of cancer. And Don has put a great deal of time into thinking about that and into communicating that to the fire service in a way that I think is impactful and has helped. Don would agree with me, but from my view of this, that the volunteer fire community is ahead of the career fire community with protecting themselves for the carcinogens that we're going to talk about. So I appreciate everyone who signed on to listen to us tonight. I hope that you get information here. Every time I do it, I learn something from Don, and it's a shared discussion about a really, really important issue in the volunteer fire service, and something that I'm proud to be part of. I hope that when we're done, there's something here that you can take back to the communities and the fire departments that you serve that's useful to you. As was said earlier, if you have any specific questions about your claim or about an issue that you have or a member of your department has, feel free. You can raise it here if you like, but if you don't, my contact information is there as well, and you can feel free to call at any time, and I'll try to answer the questions that you pose. But with that, I'll kick it back to Don to start us off.
Okay, there's a set of objectives. I'm not going to read them. They're there because 40 years ago when I was working on an instructor's program, they told me you always needed objectives, so there they are. But in a nutshell, we're going to talk about first how firefighters get cancer, and then most importantly, how we can prevent contracting the toxins that cause cancer. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about the law, what your rights are, and how to go from there. So as we said, if you've got questions, go from there. This slide might be slightly dated, and it says cancer is the most dangerous and unrecognized threat to firefighter health and safety. And I think more and more we're getting more recognition on cancer. It now becomes more of a leadership issue and an individual firefighter issue, and seeing that we prevent it. And hopefully this is the last generation of firefighters that see a huge spike in cancer as we go forward. There's lots of studies, we'll talk about a couple of them tonight, that show there's a definite correlation between firefighting and the contraction of cancer. If you look at the numbers on the screen, and these are really there You don't have to dwell on the exact number on any of these because depending on which study you call up, the numbers might be slightly different. But every study, and there's more coming in all the time, when we look at cancers, a large number of them have a much greater incidence of occurring in firefighters than they do in the general population. And this is concerning because firefighters generally start as a pretty healthy subset of the general population when we first get into the profession. And as we go forward, far too many of us get cancer. And we'll talk about a little bit about firefighter cancer and how it's different than that in the regular population.
Hey, Don, if I could just interrupt, the slide that's up is a quote from Dr. Grace LeMasters that confirms pinpointing the exact cause of cancer is extremely difficult. And that name, though, is really important. As Don starts to talk about the studies, Dr. Grace LeMasters did what's called a meta-analysis in 2006. In the world of epidemiology and public health, a meta-analysis is essentially taking studies that predate 2006, the major studies that were done on cancer in the fire service, and then pooling that data. In epidemiology, the more data you have, the stronger the study. And her 2006 meta-analysis has probably been quoted or utilized at every state legislature that's passed cancer presumption since it was done. It is kind of the starting point in what we consider to be the modern literature on the epidemiology of cancer in the fire service. She's actually now been tasked with creating a firefighter cancer registry by the federal government. So Dr. LeMasters, if anyone's interested in delving into cancer in the fire service, that is a very good name to start with as you start to look at the data that is relevant to firefighters with this disease.
Okay, here's, make sure I did skip a slide. Some cancer studies are note a couple things. One is firefighters tend to get cancer at a younger age, and it tends to be more aggressive. And that's important for a couple reasons as you look at that. And I apologize. I'll try to get Jerry a copy that he can send out to people who are interested. When you go to see your physician, if you get a physical through your fire department, that's great. That doctor ought to be well aware that firefighters get fire cancer at a younger age and it's more aggressive. If not, I got a page and a half that sort of explains that, because your family doctor isn't going to read an 800-page study on why firefighters get cancer. But the bottom line is, if they understand that you're at a greater risk, if you're 35 years old and you go to get a physical and he sees something in your blood work that might not be perfect, but it's not terrible, at 35, he'll say, let's watch this for a couple of years and see what happens. If that doc understands that you are at a greater risk for cancer, he then may do some more testing and he can catch it early. And the fact that our cancers tend to be more aggressive, and not only at a younger age, it's important that we find them and treat them early.
I always, at this point, when we do the seminar, I always think about and then reference two people to try to bat home an idea I think that is helpful sometimes. Cancer is an individual thing. It's based on your DNA, right? Some people have more of a susceptibility to these carcinogens and these cancer triggers than other people. For me, I think of my grandfather on my mother's side, the legendary William Reds O'Neill, who came to this country from Ireland when he was about 11 years old and started drinking whiskey and smoking cigarettes. And he lived to be 87 years old and didn't die from anything to do with drinking whiskey or smoking cigarettes. In fact, I smuggled a pack of Parliaments into his hospital room just 2 days before he died, and he was smoking right up to the end. But contrast my grandfather with a guy I represented who was the last person to beat Mike Tyson as a boxer prior to Mike Tyson winning the heavyweight championship of the world. He beat him as an amateur. And after that amateur boxing career, he became a triathlete and was one of the most fit people around. He was training for and participated in the Ironman in Hawaii, and he developed lung cancer from secondhand cigarette smoke working in a prison. Just his DNA, while in every other way physically he'd be more gifted than the legendary William Reds O'Neill, he was not in a DNA standpoint from susceptibility to cancer. So when, as leadership goes, and Don's going to talk a lot more about leadership in a minute, and when we look at these cases and these numbers, there's increased risk. But what I think we are asking the fire service to do is to treat everybody as though they are the most susceptible to these carcinogens, because the studies that are even up on the screen now, those studies are done as part of the Lemasters meta-analysis, which looks a lot at older studies and older data. The 2006 in this world is old data because it pulls studies from fires that happened back in the 90s, the 80s, and the 70s, where I've learned from Don and from the literature that many of those fires would be more wood-based or cotton-based fires compared to many of the things that are burning now. So there's this sort of increased percentage chance of these cancers. There's other cancers that are increased, and even some of these are more increased now, I believe, in many of the studies than even what's shown on the slide. The problem with epidemiology is that they're snapshot views of a population. So none of the studies have the same exact risk for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or skin cancer. They're all a little varied, but they're all elevated. And then if the folks on here are in position to make decisions or to direct how things are done on the fire ground or in the firehouse, I think, my point is to make sure that you treat all of your people as if they are more susceptible to this disease than less. And that the studies are a good place to start to get a sense of what things you're at risk for. But the best procedures are still always the best procedures that reduce your exposure to smoke, soot, diesel emissions, building materials, other things Don's going to talk about more in a minute. But that is, I think, the best use of this data is to be the foundation for making those types of decisions.
Okay, and the next slide talks about several important points. One is that it's unlikely that you're ever going to be able to determine which fire you got cancer from. Is that it's a cumulative effect from repeated exposures. So the more we can reduce the number of exposures you've had or limit them or reduce the amount of soot you get on your body is critical to avoiding cancer during the course of your career. And as you look at that, people who have studied this, and when I first started to look into this a little more closely, the first way we get exposures is through inhalation. And that didn't surprise me at all. If you can see what you're breathing, it's probably not a very good idea or very healthy for you to do that. But oftentimes we continue to do that. Much to my chagrin, throughout my career in every rank and to when I retired as chief, the Harrisburg Fire Department was terrible at wearing breathing apparatus during overhaul.
Probably next slide, Don. I think you're up to.
Okay, but the second way we get it is through our skin, and that skin exposure is truly shocking to me. But it's almost as important as the inhalation hazard. And that one we've already talked about, I believe. And so, as you look at this study, and because as you look at volunteers, you look at career, the cancer numbers that we look at.
Don?
Lost ya.
Can you hear me, Don? Well, I'll pick up for what Don was saying until he pops back up.
Pardon?
Are you there, Don? There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. When the doc asks that question, people tell him, I'm a carpenter, I'm a school bus driver, a school teacher. Whatever you do to make a living is how it's described. So when they do the analysis, an epidemiologist goes in and says to the cancer registry, how many firefighters have had cancer in the last 5 years? And they give them a number based on how people answer the question, what do you do for a living? The only body that answers firefighter in that, or most of the people, are career firefighters. So the cancer number we have is off by orders of magnitude because it reflects, I believe, mostly career firefighters. And this slide shows you what's nice about this is a homogeneous group of people. It is all career firefighters from the Seattle Fire Department hired before 1977. That's an era where people certainly weren't wearing breathing apparatus for overhaul, probably, maybe not even in some working fires. And 36% of the firefighters have retired from the fire department have cancer. 975 firefighters. I'm sorry, 347 of the 975 have cancer. 6%. So they get closer to real numbers. The problem of cancer in the fire.
I'll jump in, Don. You broke up. I don't know if the connection's off, but one of the things I see in this slide is I focus on brain cancer, where there's 5 out of 975 firefighters.
And a significant number of female firefighters, probably longer than.
There you go.
Hello?
Are you back, Don?
Yeah, you can hear me?
I at least for me, I only heard, I just heard you come back with female firefighters was the first 2 words I heard for a bit. You froze a little bit. But I was in the process of commenting about brain cancer, that with brain cancer, sometimes we'll hear these insurance defense lawyers minimalize, say, oh, it was only 5 people out of 975 people. Epidemiologically, that is an unbelievably high number of brain cancers for that 975 member population. Nationally, brain cancer occurs in about 6 out of every 100,000 people. So, that number is, almost 100 times less or greater rather than what they see in the United States population. So all of these studies just continue to show us that there is a significant increase of cancer in the fire service. I think at this point, the problem is, completely, it's unavoidable. I mean, it is an absolute problem in the fire service. You back, Don?
I'm back, but now I can't advance the slide. Jerry, can you advance them?
There we go. That was the San Francisco ladies.
Okay, yep. There's the San Francisco lady. I'm sorry, guys. You live in a bad zip code. Verizon doesn't spend a whole lot of money on the internet. I'm still on a stranded pair of copper wire. But San Francisco arguably is the place to study female firefighters. They've had them longer than anybody else in significant numbers. And among 40 to 50-year-old firefighters, female firefighters in San Francisco, they have 6 times the national average of breast cancer. And that is due to a fairly simple reason, I think, in that carcinogens tend to concentrate themselves in fat tissue. And breast tissue is largely fat, so it concentrates there and manifests itself as a much greater amount of breast cancer. And Jerry, I can't advance this thing for whatever reason at the moment.
So Dawn, you just tell me whenever to advance it, and I'll advance it.
Go ahead. Go to the next slide. Oh, that's a good slide right there, Jerry. I don't think there's anything shocking in this slide. Most of us have known for a long time that, depending on your age, that residential fires are different than they were 15 years ago. Primarily due to the amount of plastics that are in homes. As you look at that, as I got closer to retirement, I would, I'd go to a structure fire and I'd say to somebody, geez, fires seem to be hotter and faster than they used to be. And somebody would always say, no, boss, you're just older and slower. And since then, the research has come out to show that flashover is about 10 times as quick as it was 20 years ago. And so we were probably both right. I was older and slower and fast, and fires were hotter and faster. And it creates a real problem of toxicity in homes, and it lasts not only in the early stages, which actually, and we'll talk a little bit about why the early stages of a fire are probably safer than in the latter stages during overhaul. But it's a real toxic soup that we live in, and if it gets on our skin, if we inhale it, it causes problems. The next to the last bullet point on the slide is interesting, and it really shows firefighters trying to do a good thing. I don't know if anybody there, I can't see most of you, are old enough to remember probably the mid to late 70s. The fire service had a huge push on to make a flame retardant cigarette because the number of careless smoking fires we saw, setting couches on fire, setting bedding on fire. And we had introduced legislation in every state legislature to require fire-safe cigarettes, which meant if you lit a cigarette, puffed it twice, put it down and said, good afternoon, how are you? When you went to puffing the cigarette again, it would be out. The tobacco industry figured out very quickly that wasn't a model that was going to keep people smoking cigarettes, and particularly wasn't going to get younger people addicted. So they came back to the fire service, and they had bottled up the legislation while we got it introduced in every state. It passed nowhere. And they said, here's the deal. If you guys back off the fire safe cigarette, we will use our resources to lobby to have bedding and overstuffed furniture treated with a flame retardant and furniture so that cigarettes won't set them on fire anymore. And in addition to that, we'll give you prevention money to do that. The fire service took the deal. The tobacco industry, true to their word, got flame retardant furniture passed in every state in the country. And at the same time, DuPont had manufactured a new chemical called Trist. Does anybody remember flame retardant children's sleepwear? Onesies that were flame retardant? I can't see if anybody does, but usually there's 3 or 4 people old enough. Go back to that other slide, Jerry, if you would. And the Consumer Product Safety Commission pulled the sleepwear off the market because it had a carcinogen in it. Well, DuPont, not wanting to miss out on a good opportunity, went to the furniture industry, said, we have this cheap flame retardant called Trist. You can soak your fabrics in it and meet the new laws. Most people, many furniture companies, started using Trist in furniture. Now, when you have a smoldering couch or a mattress, one of the things it's putting into the atmosphere is that very same chemical that caused the Consumer Product Safety Commission to take it off the market for kids. It's a serious enough problem that Massachusetts, California, and perhaps Michigan, a third state, have introduced legislation to ban cancer-causing flame retardants on fabric. So it's just, something that we thought we were doing the right thing, and it's come back to bite us. Okay, next slide, Jeff. Okay, a couple pictures here real quickly, and really this is about leadership is what we want to talk about, is the basic theme on this slide. And the first slide on the upper left there is a car fire. Car fires didn't look like that 50 years ago when I started as a volunteer, certainly, but every 3 or 4 years, the federal government tries to get better gas mileage, or requires better gas mileage. And we get better gas mileage by taking metal out of cars and substituting it with plastic. And because of that, you get toxic car fires that are burning all sorts of plastic. There's very little metal in a car. So you ought to wear your breathing apparatus on all calls from when you step off the rig till you get back on, essentially. And that's something we want to think about throughout this presentation, is your SCBA is your friend, and you need to wear it all the time. The second picture is really a leadership story I have that's personal, and that's about a dumpster fire. And if you look at the picture of the dumpster fire, 2 guys without breathing apparatus on, in my career, that without face pieces on, that wasn't uncommon. Even having breathing apparatus on would have been somewhat shocking at a typical dumpster fire. And for whatever reason, on about every dumpster fire I've ever been on, somebody always ends up in the position of looking over the edge of that dumpster. I don't know what we're looking for in there. You know, Jimmy Hoffa, buried treasure. I never found anything in there but wet, smoldering garbage, essentially. But somebody already had a peek just in case it was Jimmy. And Mike, you want to comment on dumpsters?
Yeah, the thing about dumpster fires is that a lot of times they're looked at as, you know, not a significant event, not a really risky event to the fire service. But when the studies that we've reviewed and the experts that we use in these cases confirm that when trash is burned at a certain temperature, particularly compacted trash that's dense like this, and it gets hot, it produces a certain type of chemical called dioxin, and a specific type of dioxin. That dioxin is the carcinogen in Agent Orange that has led correctly to many Vietnam veterans getting benefits for cancer. So as Don says, from a leadership standpoint, that what I ask is that when you look at these two fellas putting the fire out in the dumpster, that instead of looking at that smoke as just a dumpster fire smoke, look at that as Agent Orange and treat it as Agent Orange. May not be, but there's a possibility that it will be. And there's just no sense in taking that risk. Dioxin is a unique carcinogen. According to the IARC, it's what they call an all-site carcinogen. Carcinogens, in just sort of a loose kind of, you know, jailhouse medical, medical school way of looking at it, they come as initiators. Some carcinogens initiate cancer in certain organs, and then there are carcinogens that or what they call promoters, or they promote the cancer. Really what they do is stop your body from shutting the cell disruption off. Dioxin it hits from both sides of the plate. It's an initiator for lung cancer. It's an initiator for certain types of leukemia, but it is the main promotional carcinogen that firefighters will come in contact with. You'll find dioxin in diesel emissions. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has evaluated what comes out of a diesel engine in what they call monograph. Monographs are like summaries or evaluations. Monograph 105. Anyone who's really interested, you go to page 41 of IARC Monograph 105, and you'll find a list of carcinogens delivered with diesel emissions. On that list is dioxin. IARC Monograph 98 is specific to firefighters. They evaluated the occupation and the fire service for its carcinogenicity. And at pages 401 to 403, they list the carcinogens that they found in smoke and soot through scientific study. And on that list is dioxin. So a firefighter is routinely going to come in contact with dioxin when they come in contact with smoke, soot, and diesel emissions. And that is a very, very dangerous carcinogen because of its role as an initiator, but even maybe more so of its role as a promotional carcinogen. So anytime that you're looking at that dumpster fire, hopefully in the future, you'll look at that and see it more as Agent Orange and more as the significantly dangerous event that it is than something to, be done in 5 minutes and do without the mask on your face.
And that's, that when we talked about firefighters getting cancer when we're younger and it's more aggressive, that's one of the reasons it's more aggressive. Just want to finish talking a little bit about leadership, because most of what we're going to talk about doesn't cost a lot of money, but it does take some courage and it does take some leadership to implement what we're talking about. And if you look at, this is a story about a dumpster fire I had in my career that has a great leadership lesson in it. I was a fairly newly minted lieutenant, maybe 4 months on the job. Went to work on a summer evening. And about 6 o'clock at night, I was working at Station 8, right off of Market Street on 13th Street in the city of Harrisburg. And we got hit for a row home fire, and we burned about 4 houses out of the middle of about an 8-house row. Got back to that, got cleaned up. It's probably 10:30 at night. And for the whole rest of the evening, every 45 minutes, it was either a false box or a car fire or a dumpster fire. And I'm doing all the reports, so I'm getting 5 minutes of sleep 7 different times maybe. And I tell you about the sleep interruption because later in my career, I read several studies on how being sleep impaired hurts your judgment. It's equivalent to being drunk. So I used that in my defense. But about 6 o'clock in the morning, it is just getting light. We get hit for a dumpster fire at 13th and Market, literally a quarter block from the station. I got 2 career guys and 3 volunteers on the rig with me. As we pull out onto the ramp and we look to our right, we can see a well-involved dumpster sitting on a sidewalk up against a brick wall at Pinamani Sub Shop. Well, immediately the guys in the back starts banging on the glass, yelling, "Stang it. Use the top-mounted deluge gun to knock down the dumpster fire." Well, we have an SOP in the fire department at the time that says for a dumpster fire, you use a trash line. That's probably why we call it the trash line, but 100-foot line on the front bumper. But they're yelling, "Stang it, stang it." And, why not? We've had a busy night. I want to be loved. Everybody wants me to stang this fire. So Market Street, I should tell you, is probably a 13-14% grade. And the dumpster's at the top of the hill with a 2x4 under the uphill side of the front wheel as a wheel chock. Well, as we stop the rig, I look at Don Dietz and tell him he's the driver, who incidentally died on Monday evening, unfortunately. But I look at Donald and I say, "Pool number 9, Donald. The number 9 discharge is the discharge for the deluge gun or the stang." A volunteer scrambles up on top of the rig. I believe it was Robbie Buckman. Turns it around, gets water, and misses going in the dumpster by about 6 inches. So he hits the side of the dumpster and immediately starts to elevate the string. When he does, it strikes just under the top lip of the dumpster, lifts the dumpster just high enough to get it over the 2x4 that's holding it in place. So it slowly starts to roll down Market Street, and Robbie is chasing this flaming dumpster with the string that he continues to be just missing getting it in, and the dumpster is accelerating as it's going down the sidewalk. It goes down maybe 15, 20 feet on the sidewalk, hangs a hard left, jumps the curb, goes out into Market Street, and starts careening down Market Street. Now we got 5 firefighters with hand tools chasing a flaming dumpster down Market Street. Fortunately, it's 6 o'clock in the morning and there's not much traffic. And as we're running down Market Street, I don't really have a plan of action what we're going to do when we catch the dumpster, but catching the dumpster seems to be at least a reasonable start. I remember there was a Hess gas station at the bottom of the hill, and suddenly my career anticipation light says, as the dumpster arrives in the intersection, so will 8,800 gallons of Hess gasoline, and the resulting explosion will make me famous forever. Anytime anybody goes to a seminar in SOPs, my picture will come up and they will say, "You're here because this idiot didn't know the difference between a deluge gun and a trash line." Fortunately, the dumpster hung another left, hit the curb, tipped over, and we now have 700 burning pieces of debris all over the street that we're stomping out. The engine catches up with it. We get everything not put out, shoveled up, worse down the street. Market Street's probably never been that clean since that morning. Push the dumpster back up the hill, put the shock back under the wheel, and I said, we'll never speak of this again. And amazingly, it was a fairly well-kept secret till I got promoted to chief. Then within about 30 minutes, the entire fire department knew about my dumpster experience. But the bottom line lesson is that's a leadership failure. I chose to do the popular thing and not the right thing. The result, while not catastrophic, were fairly embarrassing. And, had there been a lot of members of the public out, we really would have looked foolish. I like to say the bottom line is if you want to be loved, buy a puppy. If your job is to lead. And it comes down to that thing. As we move forward, we're going to talk about things. It takes culture change and it takes leadership to do those. And that leadership can start not only from the chief, but it can start from the bottom up. You can set examples by wearing a breathing apparatus all the time, whether or not it's required. And we would encourage you to do that. Go ahead, Jerry, next slide. This is a fairly new slide, and it's in there more for discussion than fact. Mike and I did this program in Allegheny County 3 times in 2 days, I think, as I remember. And the city of Pittsburgh's doing really good things on cleaning gear, changing out hoods, a lot of important things. And they made the offer to all the volunteers at the seminar. They had, I forget, 400 or 500 sets of used gear in a warehouse. And if they had a fire, they said, while your gear's getting cleaned or while it's drying, you can come to our warehouse and we'll loan you a set of gear for 24 or 48 hours to do that. But they have started to be very careful about how they're transferring high drive because of the amount of silica in it and the concern about the dust getting in people's lungs and the possibility of the harm the silica is doing. So they're actually something we've become very familiar with over the last year. They're putting their people in masks when they dump a bag into whatever container you're using on the rig, or when they're dumping high dry at a scene. They're putting on a simple mask to try to protect their lungs. So I think that's an idea worth looking at. I don't think there's a whole lot of research that has linked firefighting cancer to that right now, but if it's something we did a pretty reasonable.
Hey, I'm on a seminar.
Pardon?
Somebody forgot to mute, and I think they were just telling someone in their house something. Go ahead.
Okay. But so that's there really for food for thought. I think it's a reasonable idea. I'm not going to tell you there's a whole lot of research to back that up, but it makes some sense. Okay, Jerry, next slide. And simple rule. We're looking at what's present in vehicle smoke from the beginning to the end. Any slide that has words with more than 2 syllables on it, I give to Mike because he can pronounce all those. So I'll let Mike talk about these.
Thanks, Tom. The numbers at the end of each of these chemicals is their grading for carcinogenicity from the IARC, or the International Association for Research on Cancer. Benzene, 1,3-butadiene, and formaldehyde, just with regard to vehicle fires, in this one study of what they found, are very, very significant because they cause a lot of cancers. Benzene is a cancer that is a carcinogen, rather, that can cause lung cancer. It causes different types of leukemia. 1,3-butadiene is related to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and I believe kidney cancer as well in some studies. Formaldehyde's lung cancer. Formaldehyde, even there's literature out now that formaldehyde may even be related to prostate cancer. But just in a car fire where, they did a setup burn, they found these carcinogens, and there are 3 known human carcinogens that are in there that if your DNA is susceptible to this type of carcinogen, could be the day that you experience the cell disruption that starts the carcinogenic process and starts you on a road to cancer. And you are at a much greater chance of avoiding those if you have a mask on your face throughout the attack on the car fire and throughout the entire response when you're in anywhere near the smoke, because the smoke will carry the particulate into your body. In the particulate will be these carcinogens, and if it's your day, if your DNA is receptive to it, then that could be the day that starts the cancer. And even for the chemicals that aren't group 1s, 2Bs they suspect to be carcinogenic. They just haven't completed the evaluation of them yet. And even toluene, which is a class 3 carcinogen, toluene is the chemical in glue. When kids huff glue, that makes them high. And I years ago had a case for a guy who was a pressman. He was a pressman for like 27 years. And he died, and they thought he died of Alzheimer's, but his wife refused to believe that. She went to a bunch of different law firms and came to us with what I thought was a pretty compelling set of facts, and saying that her husband was one of several kids. At this many years out, I forget if it was 7 or 11 kids, big Polish family in Philadelphia. And no one had ever heard of anybody with Alzheimer's. So we started looking into what he did for a living, and we found that he had to clean a press. It was a small press, a print shop, and he had these intricate presses that he would clean at the end of the day by putting solvents on a rag and getting his face very close to the nooks and crannies of the press and cleaning it out. And when we went and found those solvents through his coworkers, there were 3 different products that were used for most of the career. All of them had this toluene in it. And an expert told us that that level of exposure to toluene would contribute to neuron damage or death of neurons in the brain. And we were able to prove that his death was actually an occupational related death and get fatal claim benefits for his widow due to that carcinogen. So even the things that aren't the known human carcinogens like benzene, 1,3-butadiene, and formaldehyde are dangerous, are very, very dangerous to you. And you can avoid it all by keeping the mask on your face throughout the response.
Okay, Jerry, next slide. And we've talked about this quite a bit. 2 routes of exposure for carcinogens into your system is first through the lungs. And you need to wear breathing apparatus from the very start of a structure fire the whole way through overhaul. And truthfully, the part where we're good at wearing breathing apparatus is probably the least dangerous. At the beginning of a fire, when you get a good hot working fire, a couple things that are happening in our favor. One is that we're training a lot of cool air into the bottom of the fire, and it's moving the carcinogens away from us as it's doing that to a large degree. And the heat in the fire is actually burning a lot of those carcinogens off. When you get the fire knocked down and it's now smoldering, all those carcinogens that are there early are still there. And if you take a breathing apparatus off during overhaul, you're probably working harder in overhaul than you have during the whole fire. You're pulling ceilings, opening walls. And as you inhale deeply, you're taking those carcinogens and any particulate that's there pretty deep into your lungs. They can be embedded. So wearing your breathing apparatus the entire way through overhaul is absolutely critical. It's probably the single most important thing you can do, and costs you no money. And granted, you know, I've been there. Probably the worst purchase I ever made in hindsight was a 3-gas meter or a 4-gas meter. You know, I'd have your lieutenant come bouncing out in the middle of summer and say, "Look here, boss, we got low CO levels. The O2 is good. Great news. Drop your breathing apparatus, drop your bunker coats. We're going to overhaul in, you know, bunker pants, short sleeve t-shirts, a helmet, and gloves." I wish I could have that decision back a couple hundred times. Unfortunately, I can't. But I really encourage people to seriously look at what that means. It may mean in the summertime you go to an additional alarm because you need more people to help you do overhaul, just so your mutual aid partners understand how important it is you get fresh troops in there and how you keep wearing bunker gear and you keep wearing the breathing apparatus the whole way through. And this last one is the dermal absorption. And I told you before, I was surprised at how much absorption we get through the skin. And we'll look at a couple slides on this in a few minutes. But getting rid of your gear after the fire and cleaning it immediately is critical. And we started by telling people that probably the best thing they could do, and this was actually Ed Mann's idea, I think when Ed was still fire commissioner, we did the program in Lewistown. Ed was the chief in, forget the name of the company right now, but right outside of Lewistown. And Ed said to us, "We're starting to wash everybody off after the fire. We're standing them up. I bought a long-handled scrub brush, a 1.5-inch the garden hose adapter, taking a garden hose and a brush, and we're scrubbing everybody off when I get there." So that's an interesting idea, Ed. I hadn't really thought about it. On the way home, I thought about it a little bit more, and I said, geez, yeah, that's an easy order to give in July. Anybody will stand up and let you squirt them with a garden hose. I said, Ed, tell you what, Ed, I live about 50 minutes away. If you call me in January when it's 10 below in Lewistown and you tell everybody, okay, good job, guys, line up, we're going to wet you down, I want to be there to watch the riot. And Ed wrote back about 2 weeks later. He said, I thought about what you said, big guy. Here's an idea. We're going to buy trash bags and we're going to bag our gear. We're going to strip everybody down on the fire ground in terms of taking their gear off, have them clean their skin, put their gear in trash bags and take it back to the firehouse and decon it. We bought additional sweatshirts that he can put people in and put them in the rig. And that, in my opinion, is the Cadillac way to do it, because soot is as dangerous 10 years from now. There is no half-life than the day you get it deposited on your gear. So if you jump in a fire truck with dirty gear on after a structure fire and you grind it into the jump seats or you grind it into the driver's seat, it sits there until you decide to go for fuel, or it's a nice Saturday afternoon, you take the rig for a ride and see who's on the street to wave to, whatever you want to do. If you get in that rig in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, you're going to transfer those carcinogens just going for a ride in Peace Fire apparatus. And to make that point, we did this program in Adams County and for Palmyra, and both of the chiefs there I know fairly well. Both wrote back and said, yeah, we thought about what you said about jump seats. We're going to clean our jump seats. So they went to the grocery store and rented upholstery cleaners. And the guys in Adams County said the first time they ran the upholstery cleaner over their cloth jump seats, it looked like oil that they struck oil. It was that dark and cloudy. They had to clean them 3 times before they got reasonably clean rinse water back out of their jump seats. So you don't want to grind that soot into your jump seats. Bag your on the fire scene, bring it back to the firehouse and clean it. You want to make sure you clean your gloves and your hoods. You know, if you have the budget and you can get a second hood and a second pair of gloves for everybody, terrific, you should do that. If not, and this is all, they're relief eligible, you want to at least get enough hoods and a second set of gloves so they got dry gloves for the riding positions on your first out engine company while you're drying hoods and everything else from being washed. If you don't have a washing machine handy, you know, you can do your hood in a 5-gallon pail, some Dawn dishwashing liquid, and a big stick. Rinse and repeat. Hang them to dry. But if you can just hang a dry hood and a pair of gloves on that first out engine in those riding positions, 99% of your fires are going to be controlled by that first new engine company. It'll give you a real leg up in getting that done. One word of caution. Mike and I did this program, I believe, in Westmoreland County in a very well-to-do fire department. 2 sets of gear for everybody, second hoods for everybody, multiple pairs of gloves. And their policy is they're bagging their gear and they bring them back to the fire station. And they had a retired guy who wasn't going to fires anymore, but had agreed to come in the morning after a fire and decon the gear, hang it to dry, and then the guys could come get it at a later date. So they get a structure fire and the chief notifies them. About 10 o'clock in the morning, the chief gets a call at work and the guy says, I'm at the fire station. Where's the gear from last night? You know, in the decon room where it always is. Nope, it's not there. So the chief said, I work 10 minutes away. I'll be to the station in 10 minutes. Gets there and there's no gear. So they started thinking about what's going on. And they're wealthy enough that the township actually pays a guy 2 mornings a week to come in and police the fire station, do some janitorial work. Oh my God, today's the day the guy comes to do the janitorial work. They run out to the dumpster. Sure enough, there's 6 sets of bagged gear in the dumpster. They beat the trash man there and they retrieved them. Chief said the next thing I did is go to Costco and buy clear trash bags. So I know somebody in Western Pennsylvania that will give you a good buy on black trash bags if you need them. But cleaning that gear after every fire, I recommend washing your gloves, even if you have a washing machine or something else. Just, put your hands under the sink and wash your gloves like you are your hands, just because I've seen so many gloves have the liners come out of them in a washing machine. It's a shame to wreck a pair of gloves. For whatever reason, it always seemed to be my right hand glove that came apart. I retired with about 15 left-handed gloves. So if you know a one-armed firefighter that needs left-handed gloves, call me.
Don and Mike, do you guys see the question?
I did see the question. It seems specific with that is a specific question about a particular case. It's someone asking about that they've been unfortunately diagnosed with cancer after a 44-year career. And what I'll try to do, Jerry, I think the answer to start for me is to contact me so that we can have a discussion about that particular person. When I get to the law, I'll be able to highlight some more of the issues that may inform that discussion. But that's going to be a very personal discussion with that person about what their exposures would be. So
that makes sense. So Dwayne, we'll get back to you on that question then. All right. And I'll have you contact Mike directly. So.
Okay, and just last thought on dermal absorption, guys. You want to clean your skin as quickly as you can. Buy lanolin, not alcohol-based baby wipes on the fire ground. As soon as you're done, as soon as you get your gear off, you want to wipe off any exposed skin that you have, your neck and your arms, and get that cleaned up as much as you can. As soon as you get back to the station and you have the opportunity to get the rigs back in service or whatever, you want to get a shower. You want to start with cold water or lukewarm water, because you don't want to open your pores. That's why you don't want to use an alcohol-based wipe, because it opens your pores and lets the carcinogens in. You want to get clean. This time of year, throw a set of sweatpants and a sweatshirt in the trunk of your car. You want to take the clothes you wore to the fire off. Take those home, and if you're going to wash them at home, wash them in a washing machine separately from your family laundry. When you're done doing the laundry with the gear you wore to the fire or the clothes you wore to the fire, do an additional rinse cycle to make sure you have your home machine cleaned out well, and you aren't transferring any carcinogens to your family members. Okay, next slide, Jerry. Just interesting as hell when you look at this. Is skin's highly absorbent, and the most permeable areas of the skin, the areas where we absorb whatever's on our skin the most, is our face, the angle of the jaw, the neck, the throat, and the groin. And you think about where a hood gaps and where you tend to get the dirtiest at a fire. We pretty much described the areas that we get a lot of contamination on. And for every 5-degree increase in skin temperature, not core temperature, but skin temperature, the absorption rate increases 400%. So, particularly in the summertime or even in wintertime, obviously inside a fire, increasing your skin temperature by 5 degrees is done pretty easily. And you're dramatically increasing how much of that carcinogen you're absorbing into your system. Okay, Jerry. We've talked about the hoods. It's obviously there for thermal protection. Jerry, do you have any experience using the new hoods with the vapor barrier?
I do not have any experience with that.
Okay, a lot of dealers now will give you a set of 2 or 3 of those to try. We've heard they're stiff and horrible. Some comments that are you get with all firefighters when you give them something new. You buy them a brand new engine. I hate the engine. Why is that? Because the discharge handle used to be 2 inches lower, and I knew exactly where it was. Now I got to look. But it's important that you wash those hoods all the time. More and more departments are issuing second hoods. It may be worth it to invest in one personally if your fire department can't afford to do one, or like I said, at least buy a second hood for that first out engine's riding position. So after you cleaned your hood and it's drying, you got something to protect you when you go out the door to the next call if you have it. Okay, Jerry, next slide. The little counterintuitive, the light area on this guy's skin are the areas that actually have the most contamination on them. And that I think is pretty typical of what we see after you've worn a hood more than once and it stretches out. And that's the area you want to get that lanolin-based baby wipe or a fire wipe, whatever you choose to buy, and get that area cleaned off as soon as you can, so you aren't continuing to absorb those carcinogens. Okay, Jerry. Interesting study. It sort of proves our point on the absorption rate. The University of Ottawa did a study, and I believe it was with the Toronto Fire Department, and they had everybody on a shift pee in a bottle at the beginning of the shift. And then if they had a structure fire, they had them pee in a bottle again when they came back, and they tested both urine samples. And what they found, and I think the amount of increase is hid behind our pictures. I'm sorry, no, there it is. A 5-fold increase in the amount of PAHs that were absorbed largely through the skin in the urinalysis. So these are firefighters that are wearing breathing apparatus or well protected. And this study is probably 2 years old now, Mike?
Yep.
That really shows the importance of doing that. And the researchers concluded that decontaminating your skin immediately after a fire could help reduce the risk of cancer. And by immediately, they mean using those baby wipes to get you cleaned off while you're still in the scene. Bagging your gear so you aren't grinding that soot into jump seats, and then coming back and cleaning. You don't have to launder it after everyone, but you want to at least take a hose, squirt it down good, take a brush and clean it good, and then hang it to dry. And then every 4th or 5th time, depending on how busy you are, where you are in the fire ground, then you want to get it laundered.
And the PAHs refer to polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. They will be found at just about every fire. And this study is significant to us in the cases that we run because, as Don said, it confirms, that a lot of times they will be asked, well, how do we know they're getting carcinogens in their body? And this study sort of assists with that. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are related to many different types of cancer. I think that the thing that's shocking for me in this, or when we put the cases on, we always try to focus on, this is your first fire. Like this isn't about, just having 30 years, 40 years. That all adds up. Obviously, more years means more exposure and more risk. But this is, they showed up, they did the urine test, they went and worked their normal shift and came back and they tested that urine and they found this carcinogen in their system. So if that was someone on that shift's very, very first fire, that's the first time it happens. The second time, the same thing is going to happen. Third time, the same thing is going to happen. We're going to talk in a minute about diesel emissions. There's more than just actually fighting fires that firefighters are exposed to that cause them to have an increased cancer risk and to have these types of things inside their body and inside their system. So this is day one. Don was fighting fires, 50 years ago. Hopefully it doesn't look like it. Should have been maybe 20 years ago, tops for Don. But however long ago it was, the first time he went in there and the first time he took his mask off during overhaul, if he even had it on when overhaul started back then, this stuff got in his body. This confirms that this carcinogen would enter a firefighter's body. And it's just a matter of that roulette of your DNA. I should probably change it from my grandfather to Don, knock on wood, who's got the DNA to fend off, from what he's told me about his early firefighting career, this crap being inside his body. But this study is something that when you talk to other firefighters about it, you point them to this study. Say, look, you go fight a fire, you don't do the absolute best you can, wearing a mask during an overhaul, having a diesel capture system, doing gross decon, as Don suggests, right after the fire. This stuff's in you. It's in you, and it causes cancer. Those two things are absolutely confirmed by the studies that we have available to us. So it's a sobering fact, but a fact that I always try to highlight when Don is done explaining what the study means and what the study found, that it is an absolute confirmation of the fact that a firefighter will, even if he wears his mask and he absorbs these carcinogens, gives it enough time to get through his skin, that this is going to be found in your body after you serve your community as a firefighter is just sobering. It just should not be ignored by the people who are in a position to force the best practices for firefighters to protect themselves.
Okay, Jerry, next slide. And the most important things you can do to prevent cancer is wear your breathing apparatus the entire way through the firefighting process, especially during overhaul. That's the most dangerous time at a structure fire. Not only do you need to have your breathing apparatus on, you need to have your bunker coat on, you need to have all your protective equipment on, just like you're walking into the structure fire while it's still woofing. You want to make sure you get soot particles off of you as soon as you can, and you aren't doing cross-contamination. You aren't sliding in your personal vehicle's car seat in a pair of jeans that you'd worn to the structure fire and grinding that soot into your car seat so that your wife can slide in, and, well, depending on how you feel about your wife, I guess. But you don't want to transfer those carcinogens to her. And I don't think we appreciate how dirty we get at a structure fire. When I started to respond from home, when I got promoted to chief, the first couple of nights, particularly in the winter, I come home from a fire, from multiple alarm, and my wife would be asleep, and the automatic thermostat had set the nighttime temperature back to 60 degrees, and I'm tired, and I really don't want to get a shower, a cold shower at 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd poke my wife and say, I smell too bad to get in bed without getting a shower. She'd crack me across the back of the head and say, yes. I learned slowly. After I asked her that about 3 times, I just come home and say, boy, there's nothing like a cold shower to invigorate you at 3 o'clock in the morning. And do that. But when we come back from a fire, we have 20 firefighters in a room, or 15 or 10 or 5 or however many we still have left, unfortunately. And we all smell alike. We all smell like a structure fire. And to me, that always smelled like we had a job and it was good. But that's dangerous. You need to get that stuff off of you. And the last thing is diesel exhausts. If you don't currently have a diesel exhaust system in your station, you need to apply for a federal grant to get it. The FEMA firefighter grants, #1 priority in health and safety is getting diesel exhaust in every fire station. Plymouth, just about anybody that sells a diesel exhaust system will assist you in writing the grant, and you need to get that done. It's absolutely critical that you do that, because that diesel exhaust is critical. And somebody just asked a question about being clean shaven. It is difficult to get a good seal on breathing apparatus if you have a beard. I actually think the law now says that if it's possible that you can do that, and you can prove that you can get a seal on your breathing apparatus Jerry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're now allowed to have a beard, but it's also catches contaminants as you do that. So the risk of having a beard certainly far exceeds any stylish recommendations or looks that you're getting. If it
Don,
were-
that's an organizational policy. If the organization requires it and the members of the organization have to follow that policy. And there's been some issues in regards to religious exemptions in beers,
Right.
discussion about that, but that is in specific locations throughout the country.
And is it still a NIOSH requirement that you don't wear a beard?
I am not specifically, I do not know specifically about
Okay.
that piece.
Okay, Mike, you want to say anything about diesel exhaust?
I do. Diesel is like with overhaul, are two of the is one of the biggest problems I think in the fire service regarding cancer risk, because everybody focuses on the fires, but when we start presenting evidence about these cases to judges, the carcinogen load, your exposure really begins long before there's a fire. Many firehouses, they require the volunteers to respond with the apparatus. So, the horn goes off, the beeper goes off, whatever it is, and you come from running from wherever you're at to the firehouse. First guy in who's allowed to do so turns on the apparatus. If you don't have a capture system, and it takes 7 minutes, say, to get out the front door, even if it takes 5 to get out the front door. If you go run, take a lawnmower, put it in your garage and run it for 5 minutes and shut the door, or even leave the garage door up and run it for 5 minutes, and what you get off that gasoline engine. Now imagine that it's a fire apparatus with a diesel engine, maybe an older fire apparatus with an older diesel engine, which is even worse. So the act of just going and putting on your bunker gear and boarding the apparatus to respond, you're exposed to carcinogens. You're exposed to diesel emissions inside your own firehouse if there's no capture system pulling it out and getting it away from the firefighters. Now you go make a run, you go to the response, and once you get to the response scene, even if it's as we described the judges as the legendary cat in a tree response, and you pull up with the engine, but the engine's not turned off at the emergency response scene. So even with the cat in the tree, getting the ladder off, talking to whoever's cat it is and getting up there and getting the cat and doing all that stuff, you're going to be standing around an apparatus that's emitting diesel emissions. As a Philly person like myself, it sort of dawned on me when we were in the middle of this. I was getting ready to cross 18th Street at 18th and Walnut, right where my office is on Walnut Street, the 1800 block of Walnut Street, where Rittenhouse Square is in Philadelphia, if anyone's ever been there. And a SEPTA bus was at the light, and the SEPTA bus pulled off in front of me, and I got hit with this like cloud of diesel exhaust that was like in my sinuses for the rest of the day. And it happened. I was outside. I was behind it. It's SEPTA, so it could have been a crappy bus for all I know. But it made me think about firefighters sort of getting used to that environment and then not protecting themselves from that environment. So, having a capture system so that whatever happens at the fire inside the firehouse, at least the diesel emissions are being removed. Diesel emissions turn into diesel soot, to Don's point about soot not having a half-life. There's a study going on right now by a young researcher from Harvard, whose name I'm blanking on at the moment, but it's a young woman who's doing research on just the carcinogenicity of a firehouse in Boston. They're looking at a couple of firehouses, and they're just trying to rate the firehouse itself for its carcinogenicity, like just living in there, being in there on the shifts you got to be in there. How much does that increase your cancer risk? And a big part of why it increases the cancer risk goes to a couple of Don's points. One is the management of soot on the bunker gear and on the equipment. And Dr. Stuart Baxter, who we may see his name on a slide in the future in a couple of minutes here, but he did live burns out of the University of Cincinnati, and then they tested the carcinogens they found on different equipment. One of the things that was shocking to me in reading that was how much they found on gloves, because the gloves were used throughout overhaul. They were used throughout suppression. They were used while you were cleaning up. They were used in getting soot off the hose. They were used really throughout the entire response and never really seemed to get cleaned properly. I think to Don's point about his warehouse full of left-handed fire gloves, it kind of makes the point that maybe people don't want to wash them, because putting the liner back in, or it's a hassle, or you just like the gloves the way they are. I've had guys associate it like kind of like a baseball glove. When you were a kid, you'd have that baseball glove. I remember being half disappointed when my father came in with a new baseball glove because I kind of had the other one right where I wanted it. And now I felt obligated that I had to go through the whole process again with a new one. And maybe some of that's what's going on with gloves, but gloves seem to have a longer life and are quite carcinogenic. And a lot of this feels like small things sometimes, but it's little things that pile up. If you're allowing yourself to be exposed to diesel in the firehouse, if you're not getting a good fit on your SCBA mask so that during suppression, even when you wear it, you're not protecting yourself the right way. And if you're dropping the mask during overhaul and then you're not getting the soot off you as quickly as you need to get the soot off your person and then off your equipment, then you're allowing that soot to come back in the firehouse with you. And Don may remember actually what fire department it was, but I remember there was a video that we had at one point that we saw where they had a young woman who they used shaving cream to simulate what soot was and how she brought it back. And you may remember, Don, where that was at before we're done. We can let folks know to look for it. But it got everywhere, that soot. And again, I always go back when we tell the people stories in these cases and we argue them in front of judges, that when we're talking about, attending a fire and making a run and being exposed to diesel because the truck was started on an apparatus floor that did not have capture system, and then going and fighting a fire and dropping the mask during overhaul and dropping the bunker gear during overhaul, and instead of immediately doing gross decon, smoking a cigarette at the fire ground, sort of post-gaming what you just did in the fire. And that happening once is a problem, but that happening over a 30-year career over and over and over and over and over again, you're really increasing your risk of bringing known cancer-causing chemicals into your body. So the management of diesel emissions in any setting, for years now, Don and I have been going around talking about how when you order new fire apparatus, make sure the exhaust doesn't come off at the pump panel. I've represented people who the exhaust comes off at the pump panel. And now most of the apparatus seem to either go up straight up into the sky or go to the other side of the truck. But it's still going to be something in your environment. Little things. Think of little things to try to protect yourself and protect the people that many of you, because you're in leadership, are responsible for. And overhaul is, I know I'm back to overhaul again. I just have to reiterate what Don said, because the studies that we see of cancer in the fire service are varied. As I said earlier, you won't find two of them that have the exact cancers for the exact percentage increase, but you will find in all of them, every one of them, that discuss overhaul as one of the most dangerous points or phases of firefighting with regard to cancer risk. And that is an entirely manageable risk. The mask must stay on throughout all of overhaul until you get outside. I attended I think it was the second annual Firefighter Cancer Symposium in Miami just before this COVID stuff all jumped off. And that people came from all around the country to talk about the ways that they were trying to manage cancer risk for firefighters. And I was really surprised at, first off, how many of the things that Don has talked about, how many of the things I used to hear Ed Mann talk about, that Pennsylvania in the volunteer fire community are already doing, were what the presenters there were talking about as best practices. But how seriously many of the fire departments took it, to the point of having a guy go outside and show how to disrobe and bag your gear in the most efficient way. Gloves first, how to not touch parts of your equipment that would be soot covered in a way that protected you the best way, where your boots went, how the bag got handled. I mean, they really had a tutorial that was just shocking. And it's many of the things that Don lays out. So people are starting to see it as the risk that it is. But from what I've learned from, and also from Don with the grants, I don't know that there's really an excuse to not have a diesel emission capture system in a firehouse in Pennsylvania, at least without a fight, at least them telling you shouldn't have it. And the membership, as far as management of overhaul and management of when the SCBA gets worn, is in your direct control. I have a personal friends. I grew up in kind of a rough neighborhood in Philadelphia, and I went to a high school, a Cardinal Doherty High School, which is closed now, But when I went, I think my freshman class was like almost 1,400 people. And we come from neighborhoods filled with people who will become police and fire in Philadelphia. So I have people who were in my wedding who are firefighters. I have a personal friend of mine who was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and esophageal cancer had gone to a lymph node. And when esophageal cancer goes to a lymph node, that's a bad sign. You know, you got an uphill fight, and he had an unbelievably long, courageous battle with it, and he won. And he won, and he wanted to go back and be a firefighter again. He's an officer in Philly. And he went back and convinced his wife that he would just take an administrative job. And they gave him a job where he was going around doing equipment check fits, but he didn't like the way the younger firefighters looked at him. He didn't feel like a firefighter. So then he went to the wife and had convinced the wife that he would go to a really slow station, and he would go out ride out his career just with a slow station, and he would look after himself. And that got boring soon enough, and he would find his way back to one of the busier places. And when that train derailed down here in Philly, he got accommodations for being the first person to kick in a window and go rolling in to save people. And I'm unbelievably proud of him. He's a great guy. He's doing a great service. But I'm watching a fire on one evening that's a 3 or 4 story apartment fire in Philly. And there's a helicopter that's flying around, and they're ventilating the roof. The firefighters are ventilating the roof, and they're showing the pictures of the firefighters. And my friend has a very distinctive last name. And who do I see cutting across the roof with not even with a pack on his back, while they're cutting holes and smoke's pouring out of the house? And I asked him about it, and he just sort of had like a fatalistic view, like he had already beaten cancer. And for him to beat esophageal cancer, they removed his esophagus and they stretched his stomach up to make an esophagus. And that guy is not wearing a mask when he's supposed to be wearing a mask. So I understand the battle that you have, but the one thing about him, and I made him admit it to me in a bar, that as much as he loved firefighting and fought to get back to be a firefighter, that if leadership in the city of Philadelphia, which they've done now, they've improved a lot of things in the city of Philadelphia, if they made him wear that mask or not be a firefighter, took firefighting away from him, then he'd wear the mask. The fact that it was allowed to go on is the failure of leadership that aggravates me. You're going to have people like Don. I've heard Don explain in some of these seminars we do about the first time, you know, when he was in it, not that when he was in it, but he has a story about a young guy who was in like a simulated environment and sort of couldn't hack it and had to get out of there. And he looked at me once when he was telling the story, and he said, I'd have died in there. And I know that he meant it. I know my buddy would have meant it. But when you're in leadership, that's who you're protecting. But that guy loves firefighting so much that if you told him, hey, that mask comes off your face again, I'm fining you. If it comes off a second time, I'm going to suspend you for a number of days. The third time it comes off, you're not going to be a firefighter anymore. There'd be bitching and moaning, there'd be complaining, but everybody put that mask on. So it's a leadership thing that I think you guys can go back and enforce in a way that it will protect your people from this disease. Because in my setting, now having evaluated maybe 190 of these cases and having many, many people die from this disease and be working with their families to get fatal benefits for them, I see the other side of it. You know, I see the loss. And if you see the loss enough from this disease and what people go through with this disease at the end of their life, you think that wearing that mask wasn't a bad idea. Getting that capture system wasn't a bad idea. Contacting Don Conkle for advice on how the best do gross decontamination would not be a bad idea. So with all that said, you know, I always feel compelled in these. I know I'm going to talk about the law in a minute, but you know, I implore you. I represent all kinds of unionized people, non-unionized people, including the Philadelphia Eagles. That I'm one of 2 lawyers in Pennsylvania who's allowed to represent the Eagles. I say that because while it's probably one of the most rewarding things I've done in my career, representing firefighters who've been diagnosed with cancer, I hope I never have to do it again. I hope I don't, because it's a horrible disease and it ends people's lives early. And I think we're at a point now where we can make the next generation a lot safer than a lot of you older guys were. But that's it, Don. So next slide, I guess.
Yep, go ahead, Jerry. You know, we've already talked about this. You know, obviously what we're burning today in fires is a whole lot different than what we were 20 or 30 years ago. When I first came on the job, If you had a mattress fryer, you knew it when you pulled up on it. It smelled like a mattress. And today, a mattress fryer smells like just about a couch or anything else that's burning in the house. You know, and so it goes from there. I tell the story that I was driving Charlie Berry, who was the battalion chief at the time, and we pull into the street, and about a quarter of a block from the house, and I'm all proud. I said to the boss, I said, "We got a mattress." He said, "Yep, Steely's Posturepedic." And I get out and we do what we have to do with the mattress and get back in the car. And I said, "How did you know that was a Sealy?" He said, "I had no idea. I just wanted to see your face." But you know, those opportunities are gone because mattresses no longer smell like mattresses. Unfortunately, they smell like burning plastic. Okay, Jerry, next slide. You know, chemicals found in overhaul. I don't know if Mike wants to go through that screen or not, but if you look at them, there is just tons of them that we're inhaling or could be inhaling if we aren't wearing breathing apparatus during overhaul. It's the most critical time to have your breathing apparatus on, and it's the time that we neglect the most.
And just for me, and looking at those, when you look at them, you know, think instead of seeing formaldehyde and it being a one, you know, think of lung cancer. When you see asbestos, think of mesothelioma, lung cancer, and colon cancer. When you see benzene, think of leukemia, multiple myeloma, certain other lymphomas, arsenic, prostate cancer, and lung cancer. The polyaromatic hydrocarbons, or excuse me, polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons and the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are promoters of many different types of cancers, are relevant to colon cancer or relevant to liver cancer. Coal tar pitch is lung. Diesel exhaust is specifically listed for lung and bladder cancer, but also delivers a laundry list of other cancers. Vinyl chloride is related to kidney. 1,3-butadiene is related to several different lymphomas and a couple leukemias. So instead of looking at those words as like 50 centers, like if you look at the back of a bottle of Gatorade, you wonder what you're drinking, right? Some people get lost in these chemicals and these scientific words. I try to convince people to look at those things as the cancer risk that they're taking. And if you do that, maybe you get people's attention.
And just one thing quickly, as we're looking at these, at the moment, the hazards are increasing. And, you know, one of the things that we're seeing in structure fires that we didn't used to is cadmium. And, you know, and Mike's got a great theory on that, is that if you look at a house even 10 years ago, how many batteries did you have in your house? And then think about what you have with a battery in it today, from cell phones to TV changers to just about everything you have batteries in them. And as they try to improve battery life, they aren't making them any safer. Mike, you want to?
Yeah, that's a great point, Donna. And I think that's also another point for me to focus again on the leadership of protecting people from these things, because all that we have, this information that we have, is based on past studies, right? So my experts that I talk to about different cases, you know, we'll talk about the law in a minute, but the first thing I have to be able to prove is that the type of cancer that the firefighter is diagnosed with is the type of cancer caused by an IARC Group 1 carcinogen. So there has to be this link between the cancer and a causal link to a certain type of Group 1 carcinogen. And one of the cancers that's very frustrating for me right now is pancreatic cancer. I've had a number of people call with pancreatic cancer, and the literature, my experts tell me that the literature points to cigarette smoking and chewing tobacco as the cause, and that there are no firefighter cancers that the literature currently says. I mean, pancreatic cancer is not related to a firefighter carcinogen at this time, according to the literature, is what I'm told by some of them. There's a couple who are starting to come around. But they tell me that I have a very interesting hypothesis about cadmium, because there's a lot of literature about what carcinogens in cigarette smoke cause pancreatic cancer. And the carcinogen more and more that they point to is cadmium. Well, cadmium, according to the IARC, is a firefighter carcinogen. It's on that page 401 to 403 list from monograph 98. And it's produced, as Don said, when batteries burn. So what I think we're going to see as the literature matures is we're going to see that they relate pancreatic cancer to cadmium, and because it's related to cadmium, relate firefighting to it. But the experts who we deal with in this area, they're all data-based operators. There's a hypothesis. That's me with my theory, and it makes sense to everybody, but it's not been studied yet. So we're protecting, by doing this, if you do it right, you'll be protecting the firefighters in your charge, not just from these things we're talking about now that we know about, but in my mind, you'll be protecting them from more than just this in the future as the data and the literature catch up because of the types of fires that you've been fighting with the plastics and the cadmium because of batteries and other things that are in the modern house, that there's this list of cancers is going to grow. I guess that's probably would be the title of this section of it for me, that the list of cancers related to firefighting, I think is going to grow because the data is going to come to support it. This is what we know now to a scientific certainty, to a 95% confidence interval that these things cause cancers. There's going to be a longer list in the future, which is just, for me, more of an impetus for leadership to take this seriously. But next slide.
We've talked about that. You shouldn't use CO as an indication that it's okay to remove your masks. We're worried about the things that most meters don't have the capability of seeing. Go ahead, Jerry. We've talked about soot. It's extremely hazardous. It has no half-life. You need to get it off your gear. You need to get it off your skin, and you need to keep it out of your fire apparatus. Okay, Jerry.
Even in Zoom, Don, we get ahead of the slides.
And usually by the time Mike and I get to this point, he's already talked about Graceland Master. We've done a lot of these. You need to get the soot off. We've talked about all of that. Talk about that. Go ahead, Jerry. And we've talked about that. Install a capture system, and Mike talked about turning the exhaust. And we've talked about all those things. And I think we're up to the law.
Yep.
And I'll let Mike run the slides from here.
You got it. The cancer presumption law, what was originally called Act 46, became law in July of 2011. It is it's an occupational disease, listed occupational disease in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If you qualify for the disease and file your petition within a certain time frame that I'll talk about in a minute, you get a presumption. I always try to start out by, at this phase of the law, talking about the other presumptions that apply to firefighters. Cancer presumption is unique. That's in Section 108R of the Workers' Comp Act. Occupational disease in Pennsylvania is a term of art. It only means diseases listed in Section 108. There are other presumptions that firefighters have for heart disease, lung disease, hepatitis C that are found in Section 108. A presumption is an evidentiary advantage. It's rebuttable. All of these presumptions are rebuttable. It means that for heart disease, lung disease, or cancer caused by group 1 carcinogens, if a firefighter establishes certain elements, the insurance carrier has to rebut that by establishing the actual cause of the firefighter's death. One of the leading hepatitis C cases is the Kriebel case, Kriebel versus City of Philadelphia, the Workers' Comp Appeal Board. That was my Supreme Court case dealing with hepatitis C, and we established in there that what they needed to prove to rebut the presumption that they didn't have in that case. The leading cancer case is a case called Sladek, Sladek, versus the City of Philadelphia, that lays out how the presumption works in a cancer setting. So next slide, Jared. As I already tread on this slide, that the point of the law was that firefighters would get a presumption so that they didn't actually have to prove complete specific causation between their fire service and the cause of their cancer. It's very difficult without the presumption. Only for certain cancers have we really been able to do it, because you're never going to know how much of a carcinogen you're exposed to. So without the presumption, it'd be fair for the insurance company's lawyers to question our doctors to say, okay, you're saying that this firefighter's exposures to smoke, soot, and diesel emissions caused his bladder cancer. Let's pick that. And how much? How much exposure did he have? What were the parts per million of his exposure for any one day in his fire service? And we're never going to know that. We're never going to know that for the reasons Don mentioned earlier, that, you know, the 3 and 4 gas meter, I think they even have a 5 gas meter now, that it doesn't check for carcinogens in the environment. It doesn't give levels, and there's no way for any firefighter to know how much, you know, trichloroethylene or dioxin or any of these carcinogens they were exposed to. So the career firefighters and the volunteer firefighters went to work with the legislature and came up with a way for firefighters to gain this evidentiary presumption that gives them a fair shot at receiving benefits after being diagnosed with this disease. Next slide, Jerry. The elements of the law, the first thing I want to, before I even get to these, is to reiterate that Section 108R covers cancers caused by IARC Group 1 carcinogens. So the first thing you have to do is look at the cancer that you have and be able to establish that it has a causal connection. Now, one of the things about the Sladek decision that was helpful, because there's a lot of fighting. We fought for about 8 years over what the word caused meant in the legislation. And the Supreme Court came down with a decision favorable to firefighters and basically said that the type of cancer the firefighter has must possibly be caused by a Group 1 carcinogen. That you don't have to actually prove straight up causation at that early stage. If it's the type of cancer that's possibly caused by a Group 1 carcinogen, then you move to the next step. The next step is Section 301F, like Frank, of the Pennsylvania Workers' Comp Act, that lays out the criteria that you have to meet to get the presumption. The first is 4 or more years of continuous fire service. The second is that you have exposure, be able to establish exposure to carcinogens as a firefighter, which we do by establishing the firefighter's exposure to smoke, soot, diesel emissions, building materials like asbestos, things like that, with their testimony, or if it's a fatal claim, the testimony of the firefighters who served with them. The next element that has to be met is that you have to be able to establish that the firefighter had physical examinations prior to being diagnosed with cancer, and that those exams were benign or did not show that they had cancer at that time. Essentially, we got to prove that you didn't have cancer before you had cancer. So we need medical records to be able to establish that. And that if those things are done for a career firefighter, they get the presumption. The law puts, assuming they file it within 300 weeks of their last exposure, which I'll come back to. But more important than that right now is that for volunteer firefighters, there's another element that must be met, that the firefighter must document their fire service with reports that were filed to the Pennsylvania Fire Information Reporting System. If your volunteer fire company does not report to PENFIRS, your members are not eligible for the cancer presumption law. That's basically the way that it's been played out. It's the way it's written in the statute, and it's the way that it's played out in the courts. So hopefully by now, everybody's sending reports through to PENFIRS, and if you're not, please do so. If you are, then it's pretty easy for us to get the evidence we need. The insurance companies were trying to force firefighters to present fire reports that listed the carcinogens that they were exposed to at each event, and we beat that back in the Burnett case versus Bristol Borough versus Burnett, where we were able to establish that the Firehouse software summary that you can get through or based on PENFIRS reports is good enough. So you'd run Don Conkel's name and you'd get his activity for however many years you've been reporting to PENFIRS. And if you can give me that, I generally can meet that element with that summary. And the Burnett case was a really, really important win for us. He's a client of mine. We went to the Commonwealth Court with what the insurance company lawyers would refer to as the kill shot on the volunteers in cancer presumption. Because if they were able to require volunteer firefighters to present fire reports that listed dioxin or trichloroethylene or 1,3-butadiene or whatever carcinogens were relevant to that person's cancer, we would never be able to win one of these cases with the presumption, because we would never get the presumption, because that's just not done anywhere in the fire service. Career firefighters or volunteer firefighters, they're not doing reports that include that level of specification. It's not a requirement that's made on the paid firefighter, because the way the law, the legislative history is, the paid firefighter works a regular shift, so they can figure out what fires that the paid firefighter attended by looking at his shift and platoon. They put it in to the act regarding volunteers, so that only volunteer firefighters who actually fight fires would be eligible for the presumption. I think a bigger factor was making everybody join for PENFIRST, because that seemed to be talked about a lot in the legislative history. But for our purposes in this setting, it's important to just make sure that you're sending reports through PENFIRST and that they're available to your firefighters. Once those things are done, now you got to look at how long it's been since the person was a firefighter and actively was exposed to something as a volunteer firefighter, not listed as an emeritus firefighter or a lifetime member, but somebody who actually went and attended at a fire scene or was on the apparatus making emergency response calls, even if they weren't fire calls. Because the law gives a firefighter, either career or volunteer, up to 600 weeks to file a petition. That they have 600 weeks to file a petition from their last exposure. So understand what that means, that if you were diagnosed with cancer, let's say you were diagnosed with cancer in 2017, but you're still an active firefighter, then that 600-week clock has not even begun to run yet, because you're still being exposed to diesel and soot and smoke. But if you have ended your volunteer fire service, then you're on a clock. You have up to 600 weeks, but you only get the presumption if you file in the first 300 weeks. If you file your petition, your claim petition, have a lawyer and have filed a pleading to go to court, not just told somebody it's work-related. So that's generally how the law works. That's how the law works to get the presumption. In SLATIC, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania again ruled on what the insurance companies need to rebut the presumption. And what they need to rebut the presumption, sorry, Jerry, I've been forgetting to tell you to move them. But they need, in order to rebut the presumption, they have to actually show up with what the cause of the volunteer firefighter's cancer is. They got to bring medical evidence to say, no, this isn't due to being a firefighter. This cancer is due to HP, some virus, or it's due to some guys have had a lot of CAT scans, or they've had another cancer that was treated in a certain way. Or sometimes they'll try to get an expert to say it's due to smoking or it's due to chewing tobacco. But they then have the burden of proving the cause of the cancer, which is a high burden to meet once we get the presumption. Two quick things more on the law for me as we wind down. The first is there's a lot out there about smoking, that smoking would exclude you from cancer. It does not exclude you from these claims. We prevailed in front of a judge for a firefighter who, while his Catholic school teacher wife said he just smoked no more than 5 cigarettes a day, his hazmat physical said that he smoked 30. So he smoked 25 cigarettes out of view of his wife, is what it seemed like. But he had such extraordinary fire service that we were able to prove. He worked in the busiest ladder company in the United States for a few years, busiest ladder company in the city of Philadelphia for 2 decades. The literature on firefighting and the incidence of cancer, some of the best studies, a couple of them have come out of data pulled from Philadelphia, and they would reference the high categories of runs as starting at 5,000 runs, not fires, but 5,099 runs was the high level that they would say if you were above that, you were in the high category. This firefighter had more than 33,000 runs. And we were able to show that when you compared that service to his smoking, that he should still get it because his firefighting, even though smoking's a cause, his firefighting was still a substantial contributing factor to the judge awarded benefits. So don't be turned off if you're a smoker or you chew tobacco. It has to be vetted for your cancer. It also has to be played against what your fire service is. But the biggest issue I think that we face now in the paid firefighter world and in the volunteer firefighter world with these claims is notice. I ended with this because it's in many ways, as far as the law goes, if you have a problem or a question, you can call me and I'll talk you through it. Even on this notice thing, I will. But when you go back to your fire departments, anyone who's been diagnosed with cancer, who's a volunteer firefighter or a paid firefighter, must notify the municipality that they believe the cancer is possibly due to work, possibly due to their service as a volunteer firefighter or as a paid firefighter. The notice requirement in the Pennsylvania law is a pretty vital piece of the workers' comp system. It gives somebody up to 120 days from when they knew or should have known that the injury was work-related to notify their employer. In this case, you'd notify the fire chief of the volunteer fire company, who would notify the municipality. I'd prefer if you did it in writing. It's not, you're not obligated to do it in writing, but you should, in my opinion, have a writing and be able to keep a copy of that for yourself. You want to provide that notice as we go farther out from 2011. It's a little harder to say you didn't know that there was a possibility that this cancer was work-related. And if guys delay in providing notice, if you go 121 days from when you knew or should have known, if a judge found you should have known because you didn't ask your doctors, or because you had lung cancer and you're a firefighter and you just should have known, a judge can make this finding in a lot of different ways, but you do not want to lose a case because you didn't notify them of the possibility that it was work-related. So anybody that's in your departments, anybody that's in your family, anybody that you know who's a firefighter, they can take and use this seminar to say that their cancer is possibly due to work, and I'm notifying the municipality. After you notify them, you have up to 3 years to file a claim petition. So you have plenty of time to figure it out. You don't have to have all your ducks in a row, but you have to notify them of the possibility that this cancer is work-related. And it's my strong recommendation that any firefighter who's diagnosed with cancer, any type of cancer, that the day after that diagnosis, when they sort of start getting their feet back on the ground after hearing the word cancer, that they immediately notify the volunteer fire company and the municipality that this cancer is possibly due to work, and I want this processed as a workers' comp claim. If you ever want to see sample language to put in a letter to notify the municipality of that, please feel free to contact me. But notice is becoming a bigger issue. It was a bigger issue for a lot of the older cases that we had, because guys waited years to bring these claims because they had cancer before the cancer presumption law was even passed. So, we've had people who were diagnosed in 2007 that, came to us in 2012. And by the time we got the case ready to roll, they hadn't done anything about notice. And notice was an issue, a mountain that we had to climb in those cases. And it's a mountain that's kind of a self-inflicted wound on the firefighter if you just notify them as soon as you're diagnosed. So any questions about that, please let me know. The last thing on the law, to give you a little bit of a sense of what you can get, the benefits that are available. If you're a firefighter who is diagnosed with cancer and it causes you to stop working, causes you to lose wages, you have a right to make a wage loss claim. Your wages will be based off your average weekly wage, or at a minimum, the floor is the statewide average weekly wage, which right now for 2021 is $1,103 a week. So if someone was diagnosed with cancer in 2021, who's a volunteer firefighter, and they were disabled from their job, we would look to see if they made $1,103 a week. If they did not, that would become their average weekly wage for purposes of this case. You'd also get medical benefits if we win through Section 306 F.1 of the Act. The medical benefits can really be significant to someone diagnosed with cancer because they travel with you. If you're diagnosed with cancer and you're captive to an HMO or you're captive to some health plan, you may have very limited options in where you go to receive treatment. I'm a big proponent of the University of Pennsylvania for cancer. Fox Chase is good. At Western PA, the Cleveland Clinic, we've heard good things about. People have gone to Sloan Kettering. Once you win the workers' comp case, you have a no deductible health medical insurance for the cancer through workers' comp that you can take anywhere. You can find the best guy on the planet treating your specific type of cancer and get that care. If, God forbid, the cancer causes a firefighter to pass away, his dependents have a right to file a fatal claim petition. A fatal claim petition must be filed within 3 years of the date of death of the firefighter. if we are successful or when we are successful in fatal claim petitions, the widow can receive 51% of the firefighter's average weekly wage for the rest of her life. If they have one child who is under the age of 23 and in college, it'll be 60%. If they have two children under the age of 23 and in college, that number will be 66 and 2/3% of the firefighter's average weekly wage, or at a minimum, 66 and 2/3% of the year they were diagnosed, statewide average weekly wage. As the kids get older and the kids mature out of the coverage of the act, they graduate college, don't go to college, whatever, the widow still has the right, or widower, because I have a couple of lady firefighters that we've represented who've passed, that the spouse, I should say, is entitled to that 51% for the rest of his or her life, regardless of any kind of pension they get, regardless of Social Security. It's tax-free money. It's tax-free. Every 2 weeks, you're going to get a tax-free workers' comp check, and you'll also have the impetus to go apply for Act 101 or Act 51 benefits from the state. And the medical opinion that we get for the case, I give to the families to use for those benefits. And most of those folks get help through their volunteer fire companies when they're making those applications. So I know I kind of rattled this off quick. And if there's any specific questions, I already had one fella ask a specific question. You can please feel free to contact me. We are trying to give information, even when people have their own lawyers. I will try to tell the lawyer what we think of where they are in their case. There's been a couple of cases that we didn't run where folks initially won in front of a judge and then lost on appeal. And we sort of saw that coming and tried to explain it, and people didn't listen to us about how these things have to be presented. The evidence that you need to win is relatively specific. The lawyers who defend these cases have been doing it as long as I've been doing it. And they're, to Don's point about medical experts, if you're going to get your family doctor to write a letter, you're going to get kicked in the face in this case, because they're going to go and find somebody who is a cancer specialist or a specialist in the particular type of cancer you're dealing with. I've been to Harvard a couple of times and Yale a couple of times, and we have people coming from NYU and Columbia and the University of Pennsylvania. The expert that I use mainly in these cases, there are a couple of them, but the main one, he's board certified as an internal medicine physician, board certified as a pulmonary doctor. He has a master's of public health from Johns Hopkins University, and he's got a toxicology degree. He's written 3 or 4 books on firefighter health hazards, and I think is the preeminent person on the issue, really on the planet. So we have the ability to be in the fight with these people, with those types of experts. That's critical in these cases, making sure that you have the ability to fight them with the same level or even better level of expert medical evidence. Otherwise, you're going to be in short pants in these cases. As always, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. I always appreciate participating in these with Don and for the Institute. I'll let Don conclude with his final remarks.
Yeah, I just looked at a question on fire police, and if you disagree, Mike, say, but I think the way to ensure that your fire police get covered is to swear them in as firefighters. Create a division of fire police if you want to within the fire department, and you can assign them for the division of fire police for their duties, but they ought to be sworn in as a firefighter, and then their exposure to diesel smoke, everything else is covered, and it makes it simple.
I agree with that. I think we're in a different place if they're on the roster. If they're not on the roster, I think the argument that they are not firefighters becomes a stronger argument, even for EMS people. We've had some folks who were EMS people predominantly when some EMS with EMS training, and that's more what they did on the fire ground. But if they were still on the roster as a volunteer firefighter, it didn't matter for this law. It becomes an evidentiary issue for the judge, but there's nothing there that excludes them. If someone was exclusively fire police, that could be a problem in a cancer case. And sometimes where we see it is it's particularly annoying to me because it's a person who had been a volunteer firefighter for a very, very long time, and then ended that service and wanted to stay part of it, wanted to help their community. So then they take a designation as fire police, and then they're fire police for 8 or 9 years, and they're older, and they try to use that against them to beat them off the benefit. But if they're still on the roster as a volunteer firefighter, to Don's point, we're in a better place with the claim.
Okay. Other than that, I want to thank the Institute and Jerry for hosting, and you folks for listening in. Sort of last chance to ask any questions. And Mike and I were discussing before this started that we're probably going to offer this thing live at your firehouse if you're interested, sometime midsummer once everybody's vaccinated and hopefully the world looks like we remember it. And I think there's a real advantage to doing it with your fire department and some mutual aid fire departments. There's safety in numbers sometimes. You get two guys with a briefcase more than 5 miles from home, we become experts. And we can tell them the same thing you guys are on wearing, cleaning gear, washing their skin, wearing breathing apparatus. And it comes a little bit easier to build momentum sometimes if you hear it from somebody else. So if you need a push, Mike and I are willing to travel.
Yep.
And we'll put out a notice when it's time to get it back on the road, but we're thinking early summer, hopefully.
Yep. We're like the E Street Band. We're not bad digitally, but we're better live.
Well, very good. If anybody has any questions, we'll just stay on for just one more second. You could type any questions in. Again, I'd like to thank Don and Mike. And again, what I will be doing is I will be emailing the presentation out, and it has their contact information on there. And like I said before, that there is a question on here about a specific thing, and you'd be best to just send that to Mike, and he'd be happy to work with you on that. And again, this is really an important thing to get some help if you or any of your members have been diagnosed with cancer. And I hope that Don and Mike have provided you guys with some good information with that. So I don't see any more questions on here, guys. So I think we're going to go ahead and end the presentation. So thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for hosting it. Take care.
Very good.